Well, tonight we are in Daniel chapter 3 for our devotional on faith tonight. Tonight we're looking at verses 16 through 18. And these are verses that are often preached about and taught on. And we're talking tonight about faith demonstrated in the invisible. And a quote that I have for tonight's devotional that is from a quote by Oswald Chambers, the gentleman who wrote "My Utmost for His Highest." Yes, I said that right. I hadn't looked at the book in a while, so I had to make sure I had the right name. But anyway, this is a quote by Oswald Chambers. He says, "Faith for my deliverance." Now you have to listen to me to make sure you catch all this. Faith for my deliverance is not faith in God. Okay? My faith for being delivered from my circumstances is not faith in God. And when I read that, I was like, huh? He's wrong. But then listen to the rest of it. Faith means whether I am visibly delivered or not, I will stick to my belief that God is love. See, if I have faith that I'm going to be delivered, my faith is in my deliverance, is what he's saying, not in God. Because my faith in God should be the same whether I'm delivered or whether I'm not. Because my faith is ultimately in a God who is love. My faith is in God, not in His deliverance. My faith is in the one who is the source of deliverance. And as I read that, I thought that is pretty powerful. The last of that quote says, "There are some things only learned in a fiery furnace." And as you know, we're looking at Daniel chapter 3 tonight. And that's what we're talking about, is this deliverance from God, as Oswald Chambers talks about. And this is the tipping point in the story of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. They have been given one last time to go and worship, basically, the golden statue that's been put up by King Nebuchadnezzar. And they want, this one final time. They stand their ground like they have the entire time. And let's look and read what they say in verses 16 through 18. It says in verse 16, it says, "Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego answered and said to the king, 'O Nebuchadnezzar, we have no need to answer you in this matter. If that is the case, our God whom we serve is able to deliver us from the burning fiery furnace. And he will deliver us from your hand, O king. But if not, let it be known to you, O king, that we do not serve your gods, nor will we worship the gold image which you have set up.'" Now see, Nebuchadnezzar was a little bit of a egomaniac, if you want to call it that. He was the top dog in the world at that time, in the known world, and he was the be-all, the end-all in his eyes. And so the defiance of these three Jewish men who were his servants already was the biggest slap in the face there could ever be. And so for them to be so defiant just set him off. I mean, he flipped out, as we would say. He lost it and throws them into the fiery furnace after this, we know. But they are resolute. They are determined that their faith in God, whether He delivers them or whether He doesn't, their faith in God is not going to waver. I mean, think about how they put that there. They say, if that is the case, our God whom we serve is able to deliver us from the burning fiery furnace. They didn't doubt that God could deliver them. They knew God could deliver them. And they were okay with it if He did. He said, "And He will deliver us from your hand, O king." They knew deliverance was coming. Either deliverance physically or deliverance spiritually. They would be delivered physically by the fact that God may some way pluck them out of the fiery furnace. But God may not, and He would deliver them spiritually right into eternity. And so verse 18 he says, but if not, if God chooses not to pluck us from the fiery furnace, He says, let it be known to you, O king, we're not going to serve your gods. We're not going to bow down to your golden statue. And so they made it very, very pointed to the king there, when it would have been easy to have caved to the pressure, the fear of death, and said, okay, we'll worship your gods. We'll bow down to your statue. But instead, they continued to have faith in God like they should. Now, see, these three were captive prisoners, so to speak, but they had faith in God's ability to care for them even when they were confronted with death. This is the equivalent of having a gun pulled on you, put to your head, and being asked to deny Christ, to deny your faith. I mean, that is the modern day equivalent to what they were enduring. They were being told, deny your faith and you'll live, or continue to hold to your faith and you're going to die. And obviously God chose not to let them die. But see, when asked to bow to an earthly king rather than the King of Kings, the prisoners refused. The three of them did not, and told him very defiantly that they would not. And when threatened with death, their responses were the words that we just read here in Daniel chapter 3. But see, at that moment, they didn't know how God was going to deliver them. They didn't know if God was going to deliver them physically or not, but that wasn't the point. That wasn't the point, whether God was going to deliver them physically or let them burn in the furnace. What mattered was that they believed that God would care for them, whether it was through life or whether it was through death. Their faith was not moved. Their faith was in God. Their faith was in the source of deliverance rather than deliverance itself. That's where their faith was squarely put. And in this case, God did spare their lives. There are plenty of other examples of opportunities where people had the opportunity to deny their faith in Christ and save their lives, and they didn't, and they still died. One that comes to mind is a young lady that was killed in Columbine High School nearly 20 years ago. When confronted about being a Christian, she basically said that she was, and she was killed. Because she was a Christian. God, in that instance, could have spared her. God is capable of doing anything. There is nothing that is too difficult for him. But in that instance, he chose not to do what he did in this story from Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. But see, this demonstration of faith that we read about here in Daniel chapter 3 was so moving that when they came out of the fiery furnace, when they came out with their ropes burnt but not smelling like smoke, when they come out after Nebuchadnezzar sees a Christophany, basically the image of Christ, in there with them, when he sees all of this go on, they are brought out of the flames, they're brought out of the furnace, and because of that, and because of their defiance towards him, the king was so moved. Remember, the egomaniac we were just talking about? He was so moved by their defiance and by their faith and by what he witnessed God do in their lives in that situation, that he praised God. And not only that, he openly decreed that it was against the law in the Babylonian Empire to speak against their God. And so we see later in the book of Daniel that Nebuchadnezzar, through his time where he basically lost his mind, through that he was humbled, but comes back and ends up praising God again. But we see in this moment that he basically praised God and then said, it was against the law to speak against their God because of how God had moved. And so his faith in the God of the Hebrews was beginning to develop in that moment. But see, our faith in God during difficult times can also have positive impacts and positive effects on the lives of other people. See, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, they had no idea how their their testimony, their witness in that difficulty, in that time of adversity impacted other people. They had no idea that other people were watching and taking note. And this is where I want to end tonight's devotion, is with how this similar situation has played out over the past couple of days. As we've been talking, Santeria and White lost their baby yesterday. And from Sunday, when I was able to start visiting with them at the hospital, through today, I ended up telling them this today when I was visiting with them, because it was just them and Dwight's mom that were there at this time. And I was telling them, I said, guys, I don't know if I want to tell you something. I said, I have been very, very impressed with the spiritual maturity that the two of you have had through this ordeal. I said, because at 23 years old, the two of them faced obviously one of the most devastating things you can face in life. Losing a child, I can't imagine. I pray I never have to. But that's what they've endured. And I told them, I said, not witness, but the impact that you've had on people, you probably don't realize. I said, I'm sure that some of the people that have come in through this process, some in your own families, some nurses and doctors and folks like that, your witness basically during this time has to have impacted them, because I don't know how to describe it to you. Just having watched them, it's been remarkable to see the level of faith that they've had through this. I told them, I said, as a pastor, I said, I've been impressed. I said, I just want you to know. And I said, not that because it's special because I'm a pastor, but I said, I've been impressed by your spiritual maturity through this. And it goes back to what we're talking about here. Faith during difficult times. Faith during one of the worst things you can experience in life gives you the opportunity, when you live out your faith like that, to impact people that you don't even know, or even if people are even watching. They had no clue I was paying attention how they handled themselves. And I didn't even realize I was paying attention until today, when we were talking and they were continuing some of the same dialogues that they'd had throughout this whole process. And so even when we don't realize it, people are watching how we deal with those struggles. Whether it's a flat tire on the side of the road, or whether it's the worst thing we could deal with in our lives, God and our faith in Him and how we respond to that is on display for the whole world to see. And if we handle it like a spoiled 2-year-old, that's what people are going to think all Christians are like. So if we handle it very spiritually immature, people take notice. People watch Christians the same reason a lot of people watch NASCAR. It's not to see people run a flawless race for hundreds of miles. They watch for the wreck. They watch to see how bad the pile-up is, and to see what all happens. And unfortunately, we live in a very critical society where they watch Christians to watch them fail. They're watching to see how we respond when struggles happen, and when we have those times where we ought to just cave. And if we handle it like a spoiled 2-year-old, that's going to be their aha. See, that's how all Christians are. But if we handle ourselves with grace and maturity, spiritual maturity, like these two 23-year-olds have that have been struggling for the past few days with the loss of a little girl, when we handle it like that, that leaves a lasting impression on people, on pastors, on family members, on friends, on hospital staff, whoever it may be. And so, or on the church as a whole, for sure. And that's our responsibility as believers, to live out our faith like that. And so I would encourage you to do that, to have the spiritual wherewithal, the spiritual maturity, even in those moments of difficulty, to live out your faith like we should, so that others will be impacted by it.